All right. All right. It seems we're on. So I'd really like to welcome you, if you're watching, to this first hangout about games in education, Scandinavian Edition. I'll just briefly introduce you to my uh, co-hangout hosts. So I'll just allow them to say hi, and then we'll get back to them later on. Alexander, would you just say hi to any possible viewers?
Yeah. Hi, possible viewers. I don't know if any of you guys are out there, but if you're out there, thanks so much for uh, coming to watch today. We're really excited about this. We're really excited about this project, and we hope that we can impart some wisdom that you guys might enjoy.
Brilliant. Thank you. Tobias?
Yeah. Hi, potential viewers. Hope there's someone out there.
Brilliant. And last, the broccoli, Matthias?
Yes, the floating broccoli. Unfortunately, my camera doesn't seem to be working, but I'll be here nevertheless.
Brilliant. All right, let's get started. I will mute you guys and switch to my presentation here. All right. So, here we go. Yes, I'll talk a little bit about myself and about this hangout we're doing here. We haven't come up with a catchy name, so if you've got a suggestion, please hit us with it. As for now, we're just Games and Learning Scandinavian Edition hangout, which is not really sexy and very long. All right. So I'm called Matthias, one of two Matthiases in this hangout. That's a pretty rare sight. And I have a background in media studies that I finished back in 2008, and I've been self-employed since 2008 as well. I did a master's thesis back then on games and learning, and I was pretty intrigued by all the possibilities of using games in education. So since 2008, I've been working mostly with games and media in education. I have some other projects outside of education, but most of my time has been spent in different levels of education. And I've been trying to keep on exploring the role of games in education in many different ways. I'll get back to that, but I keep on exploring how can games play a part in education, how can games support learning in education, how can games be part of creating better and more meaningful education for students of all ages. And the other part of my work is not specifically related to using games, but in creating playful communities in education and in society in general. Creating communities for working with games and for being playful as well. So I'm trying to do things like this hangout and other initiatives to make people share their experiences with games and to come up with new ideas together and to do projects with partners they might not have been working with otherwise. So I do a lot of that. And I'll just mention the most recent and the biggest project I've done for this in this playful community aspect. I did the Counterplay Festival in Denmark a couple of months ago, which was focused on games in education, games as culture, and games in private companies. And I'll do that festival annually to keep supporting different areas in society working with games and play. So I'm basically interested in all kinds of games, all kinds of actual concrete games. I've probably been working mostly with digital games. That's not to say that I'm not interested in board games and role play and stuff like that, but that's just kind of been the way it played out, so to speak. And I've been experimenting with most approaches to games in education, analyzing games as texts, for instance, but also using games as learning tools, using games to support specific learning outcomes, so to speak. The content of the game might support learning specific things. And then I've been working a lot as well with making games in education, not necessarily for the sake of making games as such, not so much for the product, but because making games is a really interesting creative process that can cover a lot of different learning areas in a very active way, where students are actually very actively working to make a great game. That's very much fun. And the other reason why I'm interested in games is not specific games, but games as images of learning. I'm really interested in games in how they can inspire us to think differently about learning. And just to mention a few of these things that games do really well, and we might use to inspire designing our education differently and designing our teaching differently. First and foremost, when we're playing games, we're framed as problem solvers, as active problem solvers that take action and do things, which is sometimes quite different from at least traditional education, where we're not always doing things with the things we learn, but just receiving education, so to speak. This is, of course, not what's happening everywhere, but still, there's often a contrast between the very active approach to playing games and the less active approach to being in a classroom. So often when we play games, we feel empowered, we feel that we can actually act and we can influence the world that we inhabit in the game, we can really make a difference by our actions. Also, when you look at games, there's a lot of learning, but it's kind of situated in a specific context. So you never really question why you're doing what you're doing, because the context kind of explains this to you. So you do what you do because you need to do that in the game, and you need to learn a lot of different things to solve the problems in the game. You kind of embedded in a concrete world where you can do all kinds of experiments and try all kinds of crazy things. And the last thing I'll mention here is the whole social dimension. When I'm looking at the learning communities around games, I'm always completely intrigued and fascinated by what's going on and how people are helping each other and doing a lot of work together to solve the problems of the game. And this is often a lot more enthusiastic and energetic than, for instance, group work in school. So generally, I'm very interested in looking at games because they can teach us about learning, and they remind us that learning is probably more interesting and more intriguing when you're learning in order to achieve something. When you play game, you learn all the time, but you learn to play. You don't play in order to learn. In school, we often have learning as a goal, but in games and in life, I would argue, learning is just a means to an end. And then finally, over the last couple of years, I've been moving towards not just games and what can games teach us, but also the question of how do we become more playful in education and in life. I'm not going to dwell on that very much here, but I'm moving more and more in this direction. How do we become more playful? All right. I'm not going to say any more about that. I'll just get on with it and briefly touch upon the purpose of this hangout and the hopefully series of hangouts we're going to do in the future. First and foremost, of course, it's about sharing concrete experiences with games, but we'll get to that in just a brief moment. There's often a lot of teachers who are not using games because they don't have the ideas, they don't have the knowledge about games, they don't think other people are doing this, they kind of don't feel they're part of the community. And we'd like to share a lot of experiences to show that these things are happening and that it's not dangerous and it's not necessarily extremely difficult. You can get a lot of help. We'd also like this to expand into a community, a part of a community where we're not just sharing our ideas, but creating new ideas together. And of course, we'd like to create a network of teachers. We've already got a nice group on Facebook with Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian people using games, but we'd like to expand this network and invite other people in around the world. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think this notion of playful communities is important. We'd like to create communities that support each other in doing playful experiments. This is probably important because it's often hard and scary to be playful and to challenge the conventions of education. And if you feel a part of a community, even a playful community, it might be easier and safer to do some hard experiments. All right. So for this first time, we'll, for the rest of the hangout at least, we'll talk about experiences with games in education. Um, and for the future hangouts, we'll of course take up suggestions from you. We can cover a lot of ground and invite people in, but uh, yeah, sorry. We'll be here for about 1 hour. We might hang a little longer if it's going well, but let's see. We'll be here until around 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Sorry, it's 9 o'clock. And in that time, we'll have 3 brief talks, and then we'll have discussion afterwards. So 3 perspectives on games in education. And I'd like to stress that obviously this is the first time, and it's probably I've done a lot of hangouts, but I haven't done this kind of hangout before. So I think it's an experiment to all of us, and there's probably going to be some things that we will do less than optimal. So please just hit us with any suggestions. And we've already decided that we'll be back in 2 weeks, June 18 at 9 o'clock as well, with another hangout. We'll announce the topic later on, but it would be cool if you would like to participate and be back. So we're hoping to get this up and running a bit before summer kicks in, and then we'll be back in August. And remember that you can ask questions with the Q&A module. We'll keep an eye on that. You can also hit all of us on Twitter, and we'll keep an eye on that during the hangout. So we'll try to pick up questions wherever they appear. All right, so now we'll move on from me and my little introduction here to the real teachers. As I said, I have a background in media studies. I'm not a real teacher, so to speak. These guys are, so let's move on. First, we've got Matthias Rosenqvist from Sweden. He's Magister Matthias at Twitter, so just find him there. After him, we've got Alexander Husøy from Bergen in Norway. And finally, Alexander's colleague Tobias, who's also from Bergen in Norway. But we'll just get right back to Matthias. And that's it for me. All right. Thank you. I'll open up Matthias.
Thank you. Okay, right. So my name is Matthias. I'm a teacher in English and Spanish. I teach at a school called Mediegymnasiet in Stockholm, Sweden. Actually, it's quite a bit outside of Stockholm, Nacka. It's a fairly small school with about 500 students, and the purpose of our school is to introduce our students to media. So we offer a range of courses in TV, journalism, graphic design, etc. And since a few years back, too, actually, we've been offering courses in game design. So we've got a program dedicated to game design. And I'm one of the teachers who are participating in that program. And as a part of that work, a colleague of mine and I, we've decided to make a project in which we use different video games or computer games to facilitate learning. So we decided to use Civilization, which is a game that I've been a big fan of ever since I was around 9 years old. So we decided to use Civilization 5, which is the latest iteration of the game, and we decided to have it as a project where we combine English and history. So we decided on 2 specific scenarios, which we would let the students play and then reflect on, which we would then mix up with regular lectures and literature analysis and discussions. So we played this first scenario, which was Conquest of New World, in which the students chose either to play Europeans discovering the New World or Native American tribes who were trying to deal with this shock of cultures meeting each other. And then the other scenario that they played was Scramble for Africa, in which the students got to choose one of three categories of civilizations. The first was Europeans, the second one was North Africans, and the final one was sub-Saharan tribes or civilizations. And then we analyzed the colonization issues of Europeans meeting civilizations in Africa. Since we've got these students who are invested in games and game design, I also decided to add a meta perspective to the project, meaning that the students got to see some video lectures on games for learning and the theories behind why that might be a good idea, and then reflect on different theories on whether or not video games for learning is a good thing. So every student wrote analysis in which they chose one of 13 principles that a professor called James Paul G has put together on why games for learning is a good thing. So that's briefly what I've done so far. I'm really excited about using games for learning. A lot of my prejudice against using games for learning has been shattered in the process of me entering this project with a colleague of mine. And I'm really excited to discover the diversity of games for learning. And when I saw Tobias your project using The Last of Us and Walking Dead, I was super excited that really coincides with what I've done previously with movies and fiction. And I was really inspired by that project. So unless anyone has any more questions or anything else, that's briefly what I've done. I'm looking forward to share more of my practical knowledge or experiences from these projects with the colleagues that I've worked on in the future Hangout.
All right. I accidentally happened to click on a question, and it kind of, I didn't know that we actually have to answer the question in the Hangout when we decide to answer the question. I tried to type in an answer, but I couldn't do that. So we've got one question that I accidentally deleted.
Right.
We'll get back to that. But it was really interesting, Matthias. And let's see if there's questions when we're done with the other two briefs.
Yeah.
And if not, we'll talk amongst ourselves. So let's jump straight on to the next speaker, Alexander. Will you tell a bit about your experiences with games?
Absolutely, Matthias. I think I'd just like to introduce myself a little bit more than I did in the very beginning. I teach English and social science at Noel Grieg Upper Secondary School in Bergen, Norway, along with my colleague Tobias that you're going to be hearing a lot more from later on. Now, in our project, we've also used a Civilization game, though we've chosen Civilization 4 as the game that we've used. And we use this game in social science, English, and Norwegian over a 4-week period. Where in that period, we spent say 40% of 40% of classroom time or thereabout was spent actively playing the game, while the remaining were spent actively playing the game, while the remaining 60% more or less was spent doing doing various activities tying in our curriculum goals to that game. So in this very brief introduction to what we're all about, I think I'm going to focus mostly on social science. Now, the concept of the Civilization 4 game is basically that you, the player, take charge of a civilization through its development from approximately 4000 BC and into and beyond modern time, and in order in order to play the game well, you need to make good decisions that benefit your civilization and your populace. Now, uh, we took we used quite a different approach to that. We used quite a different approach to that Matthias used over in Sweden, because we've been focusing mostly on the concepts presented in the game and relating those concepts to curriculum uh, 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 to curriculum goals in social science. Like for instance, in the game, uh, uh, you're able to uh, in the game you're able to build infrastructure. You're able to make use of natural resources. You're able to make use of uh, uh, you're able to make use of all kinds of natural resources. You're able to enter into and leave treaties with other civilizations or nations, if you will. And uh, basically, what we wanted to achieve was for our students to uh, simulate being statesmen, basically, and then see, okay, how can these concepts that we encounter in the game relate uh, relate to concepts in the real world that we want to know more about, that we want to explore. Say, uh, 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 say for example, uh, what are the consequences of not adequately developing your infrastructure? How does that uh, uh, how uh, uh, how does that influence a nation's relative wealth or development in relation? What kinds of factors uh, decide whether your relations with other nations are good or not good at all? What kinds of factors decide whether a civilization? What kind of factors decide whether or not? What kind of factors decide whether what kind of factors decide whether or not another civilization will enter into war with you, for example? And uh, Using game like Civilization 4, students of social science get to be experimenters in a way that uh, uh, they get to be experimenters in a way that we're not really able to replicate through any other means that I know of beyond using computer games. Uh, uh, so so adding this simulation aspect to uh, 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 to a social science course, I feel is very, very beneficial. Another thing that we did throughout this project is that our students blogged about their experiences playing this game. And uh, game-based projects like this, I feel, are very, very useful for student blogging, because one of the things that one of the things that I believe to be of value when students blog, is that they get the real and clear impression that somebody is actually reading and appreciating what they're writing beyond uh, 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 somebody beyond the person that's going to be grading their papers, that is. And let's face it, there aren't really all that many things that 16-year-olds write about that very many people would find all that interesting. But through uh, but through blogging about a project like this, through blogging about a through blogging about a project like this, my students got a really, really real sense that somebody is actually reading this, somebody's actually appreciating the stuff that they're writing about, and uh, and it and it's my very, very strong impression that the quality of writing and the motivation for writing quality stuff really, really improves from that. There's a whole lot of other things that I could. There's a whole lot of other. There's a whole lot of other things related to this project, related to this project that I could talk about as well. But I think I'll get back to that. I'm going to get back to that at another time, and I think I'll give the word over to my colleague Tobias. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just do a quick intervention and try to turn you off here. All right. All right. I don't know if I get the image back. Thank you, Alexander. That was really interesting and nice to get a bit more into your experience with civilization. I'm really intrigued by the work you do. It's very interesting. I'm thinking that maybe we should try, because we got a question that was rather specifically for what you've been talking about with civilization. In the QA tab, we've got a question from Jan Peter Hammersland. Did you play at low difficulty level? There are loads of parameters affecting the game. Did you have a Civ crash course, or did you just rely on the in-game help? Could you say a bit about that, Alexander?
Now, as those of you who are familiar with the Civilization series would know, Civilization is an extremely complex game. There are a load of different factors that one needs to be needs to be aware of. One of the things that means is that in order one of the things that the things one of the things that means is that for any unit one of the things that means that for any unit with civilization to be for any unit with civilization to be successful, you have to set you have to set aside a significant amount of time simply to get used to the gameplay. Simply to get used with the gameplay. The way we did this first time we ran this project was that the first time we ran this project was that that first time that we ran this project was that was that quite a few weeks in advance of actually using this game actively in school. We ensured that all students had all students had the game installed and had time to get familiar with it. By the time we by the time we started actually using the game in school, I'd say about half the class were adept in the game. About a third of the class was about a third of the about a third of the class had a very, very good understanding of the game, and the last uh, 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 and the last and the last portion of the class, they had a very, very limited portion of the game. So what we did was that those students who felt the most familiar with the game, they were, I don't know, recruited as expert mentor players to uh, 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 expert mentor players who would have as their job to uh, build the uh, 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 to build gameplay uh, 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 build gameplay competence throughout the class. Now, with regards to which difficulty level we played at, difficulty level we played at, difficulty level we played the students were actually allowed to choose themselves which difficulty level uh, 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 which difficulty level they preferred. Uh, our recommendation was that they played on noble, but some students played at higher difficulty level, some students played at lower difficulty level. Yeah, I think that answered your question. If it didn't, just write another question, and we'll and we'll get back to that again a bit later on.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. And I'll try to say that we are done answering that question and see what happens. All right. Let's jump on from civilization and to Alexander's colleague in Bergen. Tobias, will you tell a bit about your experience with game, Tobias?
Yeah, sure. So I'll guess I'll introduce myself quickly before I get started. Like Matthias said, I am Alexander's colleague at Norgig up at secondary school, where I teach religious studies, Norwegian, and history. So I've been using games in both in Norwegian and in religion. Where by far probably the most successful one was The Walking Dead, which actually got a little bit of international attention. So that was nice. Always nice to hear that. Always nice when people are actually interested in what you do when you're passionate about something. But my first big project was using The Last of Us in my Norwegian class, where we played through the whole game over a course of I think it was almost 5 weeks. And my goal with that project was to actually to practice, to let my students practice various forms of literary analysis using 5 distinct methods of approach to this kind of analysis. So I put them in groups where they were in groups of 4 to 5, and they sat at home playing together. And then their homework was basically to play up to a certain point in the game for the next week's class. And so when next week's class came, we discussed what they'd played so far, much the same way as you would discuss if they had read like a novel, for instance, as homework. So I approached it, since this was Norwegian class, I approached it pretty much the way you would a movie or a book. And if anyone's wondering how could you use The Last of Us in Norwegian class, The Last of Us has English voice acting. It's actually texted, also subtitled in Norwegian. So in that way, even the students who weren't necessarily that good in understanding English, they could still get the whole plot. And the translation is actually quite good as well. But most of my students know English very, very well. Anyway. So we played through the whole game, and each week they got new assignments to write with using 1 or 2 of these 5 various methods of approach to literary analysis. These were reader-oriented, text-oriented, author-oriented, ideology critical and feministic approaches to literary analysis. So they got various tasks or assignments to write short blog posts. Basically, I didn't. I was planning this myself. I didn't actually have the time and the energy to create sort of like a system, a method to this, publishing blogs and so on. But I've published one of the blogs, and I'm planning to publish a bit more during the summer. But all of them wrote as if they were writing a short, like personal blog entries, but still based on these various assignments I got. We also we did one assignment on violence in media and violence in games, and how violence can serve a purpose within a narrative game. And so we compared the introduction to The Last of Us to the introduction to Grand Theft Auto 5, and tried to contrast and compare the kinds of violence in those two games and what purpose they serve within the context of the game and within the media violence as a bigger context. We also talked about the characters and talked about how they develop, talked about how Joel and Ellie, how their relationship develop and so on. For those of you who are watching who haven't played The Last of Us, it's a third-person action adventure game set in a dystopian post-apocalyptic setting where basically it's zombies. It's a zombie apocalypse basically, but as all good zombie games and movies have, it's a very character-driven drama, and it's more about the people who survive. It's not necessarily about the zombies. You can kind of compare it to The Road, I guess. The Road would be a bi-comic McGothy. It would be a very good comparison. So that was my first big project, using The Last of Us and analyzing The Last of Us. We also played almost the final 30 to 40%. We played at school in the auditorium at school. And that was actually a very, very nice experience, playing the game together and hearing the students react, gasp and clap a little bit when various events happened, and also to be able to pause the game where it felt natural and actually discuss with the students. Like, why is Jonah doing that? Why is Ellie doing that? And so on and so forth. And most of my students were actually very engaged and had quite a few very clever observations. I remember very good one of the girls in my class, actually, one of my female students. She felt, or she meant that the violence in The Last of Us is like an effect, basically, or a tool the game developers have used to put the reader or the player in a certain mood, like kind of the way dramatic music or sound effects could be used to put the player in a mood. So that was quite of a well thought out observation, I think. But like I said, my biggest project is, or most successful project is by far using The Walking Dead in my religious studies class. Religious studies in Norwegian high school has also a philosophy and ethics part. So I use The Walking Dead as a tool, or as a more like a practice arena for my students to learn and practice various methods of ethical thinking and ethical argumentation. These were consequence ethics, ethics of closeness, ethics of virtue, and I can't actually remember the last one. Anyway, so what I did was I set up to play episode one of Telltale Games, The Walking Dead, episode 1, season 1, and the main what should I say, gameplay mechanic of The Walking Dead is to put the player in various very difficult ethical dilemmas. For those of you who have heard or haven't heard of the game or haven't played it, this is also a zombie game, which is actually a good coincidence, even though Matthias pointed out that I almost only use zombie games in my teaching. It's a zombie. You play a character who's called Lee Everett, who's a convict. He's accused of murder, and you play him, and where he has a group. He's in a group of survivors after the zombie apocalypse. It's the same universe as the Walking Dead, the TV series, and the comic, but it's not the same characters. It's a parallel story to the whole events of the TV show. But like I said, you're all constantly faced with various very ethical dilemmas where you basically have to choose between one a shade of gray and the other. There are no black or white choices in The Walking Dead. So what I did was, up to the first dilemmas, I had prepared a very short lecture on one of each for one of each of the 4 theories I wanted my students to learn, and then I picked them out sort of to ethical dilemmas where I felt that this kind of ethical thinking, ethical argumentation was most suited. So then I gave them a short introduction to that, consequence ethics and utilitarianism, for instance, and we talked about how can we use utilitarianism to figure out the best course of action in this dilemma. And then I used a very good, I guess you could say, a web application for quizzes and surveys called Kahoot. For those of you who are watching who haven't heard or used Kahoot, I really recommend you to use that. I can probably get Matthias to put out a link somewhere in the online. But this is like an anonymous survey web application where the students can log in on their devices, so long as the mobile devices have a web browser they can log onto with their cell phones or their iPads or their laptops, and they voted anonymously on the next course of action. I have prepared between 2 and 4 alternatives into each dilemma, and then after a short discussion, we voted on what we would do, and then we would immediately play or put that choice into the game, and then we would continue playing the game. So we played through episode 1 and 2 of The Walking Dead. And this took in all, I guess, between 5 and 6 hours of gameplay and discussion. And so when the whole project was finished, they prepared like a group discussion where they put them in groups of 3, and then they used various ethical dilemmas from the game, and then had a discussion with me on using all 4 of the ethical theories I wanted them to learn, and discussing in what way these 4 would be applicable to each given dilemma. So by far the biggest strength biggest bonus and the biggest reason for using The Walking Dead this way, and one of the instances where actually feel that I'm convinced that using the video game would be a far superior choice to, for instance, a movie or a book, is that first of all, this is interactive, so the students' choices and discussions become much more meaningful than they would if they saw a movie or read a book or like read a dilemma online or what have you. And also, since it's a game, it becomes much more natural to actually pause the game and like take a short break and discuss, okay, what are we going to do now? It would be very disruptive if we were to do the same with a movie. And besides, it wouldn't really be a point to do this with a movie because it's not interactive. You can't affect the action in any meaningful way. You can pause, you can play again, but you can't really influence how the story goes. And since this is some people might think this is a bit cheesy or weird using a zombie game, like practicing ethical argumentation in a zombie game, because we all know there are no zombies, at least not yet. So, but that's not like they say. How can this become meaningful to the students when these are dilemmas that they have never thought about before and aren't necessarily meaningful to their life? And I feel that's one of the strengths of using The Walking Dead, because since my students have never thought about these dilemmas before, their answers become much more their own. If we're discussing, topics like euthanasia, for instance, they've probably heard most of the answers or like answers to the dilemma before, but many of the dilemmas in The Walking Dead they have never even heard of. So their answers, instead of like taking answers from some debate online or on television, their answers become much more their own, and they have to think much more for themselves, I think. Of other projects, I don't know if you're tired of me talking, but I can quickly mention that I also used Journey in my religious studies class, Journey, adventure game for PlayStation 3, as a context for a discussion about spirituality and religiousness. And I've also used Skyrim recently in my Norwegian class as I guess a hunting ground for national romanticism and giving context to the romantic literary era. Yeah, I guess that was it. Yeah. I see
Or
there's one question from Jan Petter Hammersland I could maybe answer.
yes, do that. So the
And
question is, how did you get licenses for all the copies of the games?
So using The Walking Dead, we actually only needed one license because we played the game together on smartboard. I actually noticed that I think it's still free. I think the first episode of The Walking Dead is free on iOS. So it would be really cool to try it next year to see what would happen if the students played the game alone or in pairs or in pairs or something. But one of the strengths of The Walking Dead is actually playing it together. I just brought a wireless Xbox controller, connected it to my laptop, and just passed it around the students. But since we're all experiencing the same game, it becomes much more focused, and we kind of playing and experience all the same thing together. And I think that's actually a strength and not a weakness in this instance. Yeah, using The Last of Us, a few of my students had owned the game already, and I purchased 5 copies of the game through my school's library. So my school is now actually growing a small library of video games. So far, it only contains 5 copies of The Last of Us, but I guess it's better than nothing. Yeah, and using Skyrim, almost all the male students in my class own Skyrim already, so that wasn't really a problem.
Brilliant, thank you. Lots of interesting games you've been using, and a very pragmatic way of acquiring these licenses. I think it's.
Maybe,
Sorry?
maybe answer Paul Jørgen's question as well after a while.
Yes, we can do that. I was thinking that was more of a general question, but let's just take it. Maybe should we just hear if any of you, Alexander or Matthias, do you want to say anything by now to Tobias or to each other? Are you there?
Yes,
I'm here. Yes.
yeah.
One thing that I would like to emphasize is the benefits of having the students reflect on the gaming experience while playing, the meta perspective. And I think we've all included that in one way or another. And that was one of the things that I got inspired by from seeing Alexander's project in Civilization. Having the students play in pairs rather than one-on-one on the game forced them to have a conversation and then sort of process that conversation and put it into blog posts. That's really important and really beneficial for the learning process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the students play together rather than playing one-on-one, in my view, really added value to our whole project.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to that there's sometimes a belief that games in themselves can change things, and that if you play Civilization, you will learn about history, and if you play other games, you will learn all kinds of things. But in most cases, it's the context of the game that makes the change. So if you need to put the game in a context where you reflect upon the game or the content of the game, and you can do that, of course, by discussing with your peers or in class, or you can write blog posts, or you can do assignments outside of the game that are related to the content of the game. You can do all kinds of things, but it's only if you create this context around the game that it really makes sense, if you ask me. All right. Should we take the question from Jørgen? He's asking, I'd like to see some live gameplay or videotape gameplay at the next Hangouts. Would that be possible? And I don't know anything about that, actually. Anybody got experience? I'm sure we could do it just by using screenshot. I don't know if it's too slow in the frame rate, but we can definitely try that.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah. This is my first, at least my first live Google Hangout. So how the technical issues would work out, how the technical issues would work out, I know nothing about. But what I also suppose we could do would be to pre-record some gameplay, for instance, I think would work.
Yes, definitely. We could tape it beforehand. That would probably relieve some of the potential technical issues.
Mm.
But I completely agree that it would be a really good idea to actually show some gameplay during these hangouts.
Yeah, definitely. And it would be, I guess, it would be easier for the any in the audience to actually get a better grip on how, like, concretely how we're doing our experiments in using video games and how we're actually designing our classes, if you will. Like for instance, what in my at Counterplay when I gave a short demonstration to the audience of exactly how I used The Walking Dead, I guess it became even easier for, especially the ones who haven't played The Walking Dead, actually like envisioning how this would be used in a classroom setting. So yeah, definitely, we should at least think about how we could solve this using some videotaped or live gameplay.
My students actually made some screencasts earlier on. Uh, 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 made made uh, made some screencasts from Civilization 4 where the point of that task was for them to demonstrate uh, 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 was for them to demonstrate using gameplay video. For them to demonstrate using gameplay video how conflicts arise and evolve. And I suppose I could show some of those videos actually because uh, 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 they really demonstrate how this medium can be used very, very differently from most other things that we're doing in school to get a better understanding of how these kinds of processes work.
Yeah, I think that would be a brilliant idea to also show on the same time show actual footage from a game and how the game plays out, and also show some of your student projects. That would be great. Uh, you talked about earlier on the idea that when they get a real audience, it might actually be more interesting. So this might also be part of their audience. You can think about it like that. So your students might get a bigger audience if we get an audience at some point.
Well, if I understand correctly from the main page here, there are 15 people actually watching us. Well, 15 people including us. So there are somebody out there that's finding this interesting at least. Well, I believe there's way many more people than 15 people finding this interesting, but there are 15 people finding this interesting, watching us right now at least.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll possibly find more people in the future. Do you have any? I think we're closing in on the hour here, and we've covered quite a lot of ground. I think it might be you, Tobias, is doing some kind of weird. Your microphone is doing some weird noise, so I'll just turn you off briefly. But we're closing in on the hour here. Do you have any closing remarks beforehand? I'd like to find when we're done to show one of the games you've been talking about, the trailer from The Walking Dead, because it seems that it might be YouTube videos might be integrated in the Hangout, so we could end on that note. But I'd like to hear if you have any final comments for this first Hangout.
No, not other than that. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and we have a lot of really interesting things to talk about. So please come back and tell your friends because we'd love to connect with all of you guys and uh, share our experiences, and not least, we'd love to learn from all the experiences that I'm sure there's quite a lot of educators out there that are having.
I was also really like to see. I would be really interested to see what kinds of questions people out there are having. Exactly what it is that people are wondering about on game-based learning, to actually try to answer some of those questions, and maybe also make them some make them a subject for a hangout, for instance, so that we so that we can make them even more interesting for people to tune into. Because not only have we between the four of us, we have quite a few interesting experiences, but we also have projects coming up, so we'll be making even more experiences as we go. So it'd be really interesting to see what kinds of questions people out there are having. And of course, they don't necessarily have to use the questions here. They can be directed at us, on Twitter or in the Facebook group, Spilleskolen Facebook group, or anywhere ahead of a hangout. So yeah, we can plan a little bit ahead and actually maybe prepare some questions or prepare a short screencast or a recording, or yeah.
Yes, and also if you or anyone you know are doing something interesting with games in school and learning, let us know, because we're interested in seeing other projects as well.
Mm.
Yeah, of course, I completely agree with all of you. We'd like to maybe build some kind of playful community or expand existing communities, playful communities that are already out there, and we'd love to take suggestions for what we're going to talk about. I think we've got a lot of content for at least a few hangouts in the future, but we'd definitely like to have suggestions and questions, and I think we can help with, because yeah, well, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and it might seem intimidating to do things, but I think that the more we talk about it and the more we exchange our considerations and fears uh, and experiences, we'll move further, and we'll do much better things with games and education than we can do if we just do them by ourselves. So yeah. All right. Are we there? Doesn't look like there's any more questions. Jeroen would definitely like to see some of the student screencasts, and I completely agree. I would love to see that as well. And I'm thinking that we can experiment with the format. Of course, today we've been talking a lot. We could do a lot of different things. Show videos, include questions, include other people, invite guests. So people would like to see anybody in particular participate in these hangouts. Of course, we can try to invite people. So we can do that. All right.
Mm.
Cool.
Yeah.
For me, it's been very much fun. It's been great. I'm really happy that we keep building on this Scandinavian friendship we have. It's off to a promising start. I'm really looking forward to see where we can take this hangout forum playful community thing in the future. Okay.
Mm. Yeah, and I too, I really appreciate this. I don't know, call it an call it an expanded teachers lounge or whatever, because you know, most likely, um, most likely in any one school, there are relatively few educators who have this same interest in game-based learning that we have, and in order for us to develop, we we need to be in contact with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also really appreciate I don't know, that the Scandinavian collaboration is it started. It's getting momentum, and we also, of course, would like to any teachers who are using games but haven't caught our eye yet, or we haven't been in contact with on Twitter and also all the platforms. We would love to come in contact with anyone who's either using games or thinking about using games.
Yes.
Yes. Is that our closing remark for today?
Yeah, I think so. We should just end up. Just make sure that make sure that we mention one more time that we will be back in 2 weeks, and we are still figuring things out. But I think this could develop into something really, really good, and I'm really, really excited about this.
Yeah, me too.
Yes. Yes, remember that. We'll be back in 2 weeks, June 18 at 9 o'clock. And of course, we'll announce it all the same places. And we might have a website up and running by then, I'm not entirely sure. But we'll definitely need some place to collect the videos because, of course, you can watch this video after we are done talking. It's going to be on YouTube. Um, so we might build a library of these videos that you can watch in the future. Okay. Um, I'm thinking it might be appropriate to end with a trailer from a zombie game. I'm experimenting a bit here. So when I do this, do you see me or do you see me messing about?
We're still seeing your beautiful face there, Matthias.
Oh, thank you. All right. I'll just try this and see. All right. If I did you get sound there?
We got
Oh,
that you were muted, but nothing else.
Okay. All right. I'll not mess about with this anymore now. I was just trying to show a trailer. We'll figure that out for next time. Yes. So with my very uh, unsuccessful attempt to show a zombie game, I think we'll call it a day. And I'll just thank you three for participating. It's been so much fun. I'm really looking forward to see where we can take this in the future. And to anybody watching, thank you. And I hope you'll be back and maybe share it with any other interested colleagues. All right. So I think that's it. Bye bye. And I'll see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.